So let's look at what we're talking about. Well, events are actually very simple networks. Rather than having a bunch of branching going on, you basically have a parent node, such as a puppy, that has multiple events that occur in sequence one after the other going on for a while. So because we know that these are simple networks, we can apply some of our networking tools to solve these. Why would you want to solve them? Always ask the questions. Well, we have puppies. Puppies do performances, puppies do training, puppies have invoices, etc. So what would you like to know? Well, what do puppies do after their last performance? How many times do they do a specific event, and how can you market to those events? What was the puppy's last event that they did? If they haven't been doing a performance recently, maybe it's time to invite them to a performance. And how often do puppies train before a performance? If you know a performance is coming up for a puppy, maybe it's time to get them some training if they typically don't train before it. And so that's what we're going to look at today, is taking our puppies, taking our data, and putting them into a sequence of events in a very simple network, and then utilizing our network tools, hierarchy, Walker that we've been working on the past couple of videos, and using that to go ahead and sequence these and show us what's going on for each puppy along each step of the way. So as in all cases, let's get started with Alteryx, and we're going to build this Alteryx workflow fairly quickly. And so now let's begin by bringing up our Alteryx designer window. So the first step is going to be to bring in our 4 sources of events. And we will do that pretty quickly with cut and paste. So within puppy dimension, we have a birth date that we can use as an event. Within puppy performance, we have the performance dates. For costume invoices, we have the billing date for costuming work. And then finally, for puppy training, we have the training session date as well. Now, optimally, if your information is that discrete, you might want to have timestamps for all this. I just simply had dates. And when I look in the puppy dimension, we see that it actually has birth date as opposed to a link to the date dimension. It's one of the things that you want to try to get consistency within your data marts. This is one case where I did this early on before the date dimension was in there, because I could show you how a date dimension would work. So what I'll need to do with this data, as you saw me briefly delete before, is to go ahead and bring in the date dimension. Copy that out and paste it in. Getting things a little tidy is always a bit of fun within Alteryx. So this will fit over here as well. So what I want to do with this is to join it into the puppy dimension so I can actually get out of it the date wid. I have common definition through the select widgets, so that what I get out of each of these is simply the puppy's ID and the date. Run this the first time. This might take a very short period of time as I'm caching each of these through. Date dimension was a little bit bigger, so now I have data coming out of all of these, as I simply have the individual records now that are the ID of the puppy, as well as the event date itself. Double check the join here, and you can see that we indeed have the same information for the birth date. What I want to do next is to go ahead and to anoint each of those with an extra piece of data that tells me where it came from. And again, to expedite this, we will copy and paste it. Each one of these will connect up. And I'll briefly walk you through each of the formulas. So all that I want to do here is to create a field called the event name. So we have the birth event name, we have the performance event, we have invoice events, and then finally we have the training events. Running this through because it's been cached, we now have a consistent piece of data coming out the other side. And so all that I will want to do next is to union these together. And we begin to flow all the data into a single workflow. So this gives me all of the events. I did notice when I ran through this that we did have multiple events on a single day for a specific puppy. Didn't want to confuse the network, so I decided that the safest thing to do would be to go ahead and summarize this, so that then I only have one of each type of event occurring on a specific day. So I went ahead and grouped it by the puppy, the event name, and the event date, and then counted the number of events, so that way we can not get over concerned with things that are happening on the same day, because they're pretty much the same event. And what I really want to do with this data, and that's what we're going to do for this first step, is that I want to begin to save this data and be able to reference it back. For that, I need to identify each of these as an individual event. So to do that and get something out of it, I decided to go ahead and to sort it first. So the first sort that we're going to be using sorts it by date to make it look a little bit more like it's real-time data that was captured. I want to add an ID, a WID, to each of these records, so now I can actually have a dimension that I'm creating. And then I'm going to sort it one more time, getting it in order of the puppy and the event date and the event name, so that now I can utilize one of my favorite widgets. Where we have that widget is up here in preparation. It's the tile widget. I've used this for a couple of different purposes. It's great for actually doing what I need to do now, is that is going to be sequencing each of the events within the puppy. And I do that by choosing the tile method of unique value. I want to have the unique value being the puppy ID. And then I want to also group it by the puppy ID. And that way what it will do when we run this through is you will see, and we'll drag this up and drag this down, is that for any specific puppy, it now has gone ahead and given it an ID for the puppy itself, and then order them within sequence. So you see basically puppy 1 has 8 events, puppy 2 events are renumbered as well. So now this is giving me a sequence number for the events within each puppy. So this gets me my event data. Want to go ahead and clean up the data as well, so I will drop a select onto the end of this. Get things back in a little bit better order. We have the warehouse, the WID, or the warehouse generated ID for the event, the puppy. the event name, but after this, after each puppy, we want to go ahead and get an ID for the sequence, and we'll rename that to event sequence num. Then I have event day name and the event date and the event count. It's a little bit large. I don't quite need to be a double precision number. Knock that down, and I don't need tile because that just came as part of the tiling process. What it did when I first ran this through is I went ahead and saved this into the data warehouse of my own little data mart. But for the purposes of this exercise, we can just go ahead and do a browse on the end of it and see now we have an ID for each node, the puppy that the event was for, the sequence number that that event occurred chronologically, the name of the event, the date WID of the event, which gets me to all the data information that I need, and a count just because there are some that have multiple, for example, 3 invoices came for the same day. I only just wanted to capture that as a single element or a single node, and then the count was there. So now the data is, to a degree, prepared as far as a dimension is concerned, which is I've identified each of the events by puppy within a sequence so that now I can post-process this data to going into creating the chain link between them. If you wanted to get pure within your data warehousing, you would probably want to create an event name dimension and then assign the numeric value associated with an ID or a WID for that event in here. For the sake of this exercise, I don't mind just having its name in here. And moving forward, it makes it a little bit easier to see the data than always wondering what the number assigned to it means. So now we have our unique nodes, each one with an ID, so that we can begin to deal with these as a flattened network, so to speak. So what we'll need to do is to connect these nodes to each other. And that becomes a simple process within Alteryx, a little bit difficult if you're not used to the multi-row formula. So what we want to do here is to attach each node to the one that comes after it. And to do that, we're going to create a new field. It's going to be called next event WID. If we can't find it, we're going to put a 0 in there. We want to group these by the puppy WID so that we're just simply tracking each individual puppy. When we run out of a puppy, we'll go to the next puppy. We start the whole tracking all over again. And the function that we want to really give this is quite simple. All that we have is in the row +1, which is the next row coming down the workflow. So the one that is next, we're going to give it that WID ID. Double clicking on that puts it in here as row ID +1, which is the next one that's going to be coming down the pipe with its ID. Simple formula. Let's just clean up our data when we're done so we know what we want to have coming out of it. Drop a select on here. And all that we need is to go ahead and turn off all the fields that we don't want, which is basically we do not need the puppy, we don't need the event sequence, the event name, the event date, or the event count. All we need is the next WID. So that this becomes a little bit clearer as we go down the workflow. Let's call this event WID. Keeping consistency. Now we run this. Very quickly, what we get out of it is each event has the event that comes up after it. The final event, in this case the training event, has no next event, so it gets a 0. Notice a few things within this data, which again, this is randomly generated data, and then I built these data sets to help us with the workflows that we've been working on. Here we have to have an invoice that comes before the birth of the puppy. Nice to see this, which means that we would probably want to look into correcting this along the way and figuring out why the data might be wrong in a real world sense, but in our sense, it's not quite so critical. So now we simply have our linked, well, let's turn off event name. We have our linked data. Run this once again. There we go. Very simple. Now what we want to do is we want to put in our control macro for walking through our hierarchies. And to do that, what we want to bring into it is our network analysis control macro that we created in the previous sessions. Going through there it is, network analysis control. Drop it onto here. We need to link it up. The inbound node is the event WID, and the outbound node happens to be the next event WID. Quite simple, straightforward. Let's go ahead and connect all these together. We can run this. If you look at our log, you can see that it's been running through this macro. We look at the nodes that are out, and we can see that the root node is 1058, the step node is 1375. It was step 1, and you see it's passing 1058 as a node through 1375 as a node. Pretty straightforward. It's the exact information we need in order to begin to gather this data together. The last thing that, we always check the L, which is looped. Is anybody left over that we couldn't attach? Answer is no. Everything is here. So let's go back into our preparation, drop a select on here, give things a little bit better name, and clean up. So we have root node, we have step node. Both of these are actually integers, so we can turn them back into integers. Step level, and the network path. Run this one last time. I'm very amazed at how fast it is looking through that data. We now have a nice clean set of data that we can also store in the data warehouse so people can do some kind of pathing analysis. And what we'll do in our next steps through this process is to actually build the table that will give us the information from a fact table standpoint so it can begin to be worked. So this data can be considered relational, meeting all the standards that we need. We can simply store this data into our data mart, and the business can begin to use it to look at the sequence events associated with puppies. But from an analytic standpoint, they're going to have to join this back into the initial node table just to be able to see how this is working. And it's not always the most practical methodology to make the business first look at data to try to understand how to join it. Hence the reason why in our data mark we tend to denormalize things and put them into a little bit better reporting structure. So we're going to want to do this. So we want to get additional information about the node, the root node and the step node out of our actual node set of data, which is back here. And we're going to need to do that through 2 joins. Alteryx does not give you the facility to disparagingly join 3 tables together. You can only join through the multi-join tables that have the same connection. From a performance standpoint, it doesn't matter that we do this in 2 joins. It's just that people don't like to do it, so they tend to try to force into a join multiple. But let's go ahead and join this data very quickly. We'll need to join it twice. Let's give ourselves some room over here to the right. And we want to go back to our initial node data before it was turned into sequence data. For the first set of data, let's go ahead and the ID for the nodes or events, we'll match it to the root node for the first take on this. Take a run and see what we have. We have some data left over in the left. These are nodes that are not base nodes. The join is the data that we want, and everything is accounted for, so nothing's been left out. So we want to go ahead and get this data a bit cleaned up here for the join. We're going to drop a select in place. Since I have already built this workflow, I can take the cut and paste shortcut to accomplish this with. I always recommend cutting and pasting where you can. It's a great facility. Alteryx does a great job of allowing you to do that. So let's paste the select in, connect it up. Alteryx matches everything and it looks exactly the way I need it to. One more quick run of this. And you can see we have now the puppies warehouse ID, the root event ID, name, date, the step sequence number, and the next node in that step or the next event in that step, and then the network pathway through it. So to continue through denormalizing this, we'll go ahead and drop in another join. Again, joining back to our base stream of data. On the left, we want to have the ID. On the right, we want to have the step node. Running that through. Again, looking at the 3 connectors. On the left are those items that do not continue on. In the join itself, we have the data that we need. Down here in the right are all the last nodes, something that we're going to want to address, but not necessary to do so for this exercise, but we'll be doing it as soon as we clean up this data. So let's clean up this data by putting in through the paste our select. So now we have a nice data set. Has the attributes that we need it to be in the order that we need it to be, and it makes it helpful to the business community to look at this. So as we continue to add to this workflow, the question does come up to say, when do you decide to stop one workflow and start another workflow? And to a degree, you might say that up to this point is a workflow that builds the basic event fact table. And all the work that comes after this is taking that event fact table and turning it into the sequence of events, or the puppy event network fact table, as I like to call it in this flow. But for the sake of this video, as well as if I was to build this myself, I would do this all in one big long step. It doesn't take that long to run. I have all my data right in front of me. I could always rearrange this a little bit differently to make it a bit more palatable, as well as add in some additional tool containers to do that with. But since we're pretty much done with this, we're going to continue through with one workflow. So let's go ahead and once again drag our basic node information forward because we need to use it again. And a couple of things that we want to do with this is that we want to prep this for, I'll actually show you the error so you can see where part of the prep comes from. So the prepping of this data, we just simply do need the warehouse ID and the event name, because that's what we're going to replace the ID with. The event name is going to replace the ID in that stream of connections. To do that, I always like to point out widgets that are usually overlooked, and I overlooked this one when I first started with Alteryx. Since then, I've come to like the things that it can do. It's the find replace. Find replace is nice because within a field, it can find a piece of data and replace it with another piece of data or other tasks as well. So this is great because rather than doing a join, we can actually replace all of the parts of that string that match our set of data. Now to do that, one of the other things we have to make sure that we do is to change this ID from an integer to a string so that it can actually do the matching, because it does not match integers, it only matches strings. We changes the v string with a length of 15 to make sure that it will handle all the data coming through. And that's what we want to use in our replace. So up here we have connected our stream of network information to this stream of data that's going to use to replace. But keep in mind, we also have that 0 field out there. So we want to go ahead and adjust our stream of data for that. And that's easiest to do is we just simply want to go ahead and paste in a piece of data to match this. It is the warehouse ID of 0, will be called terminus, so that we can find it. All that we want to do here is to union in our data together. So let's bring this terminus record into here. I'm going to set a specific order so I don't have to worry about data types coming through, because I cannot easily change the data type coming into the text input without a select. Not wanting to use a select, we can make sure that data stream 1 comes in first, and therefore setting the attributes of the data through. Hook it up to our find replace, and then configure that find replace. What we want to do is that any part of the name in the field event name path, we want to find the value wid. We only want to match whole words within there, and we want to replace the found text with event name, and to go ahead and replace multiple found items if they exist in there. So it will go ahead and change all occurrences and all pieces of that string. We're almost to the end of this workflow. We can now run it. We see our data, including our terminal data. You can see that now each of the individual nodes that are in the path, which is great to see, but it also has the name of that node so that we can have a second look at what is happening inside of these, to give us some visual confirmation of what is happening. My next step would be to save this in my data mart, along with saving the information about each of the individual events that were used to propagate this network or sequence of events. That way the business community can utilize both of those sets of data in order to do their analysis to see what the puppies are doing in what order and how they can market to them. It's a bit lengthy of a example of a workflow, but I wanted to bring in the networking information and the idea that you can take your disparaged pieces of data to create your network of information in steps. Clean that data up, keep it in its order, prep it to go into the control program that will walk through the hierarchy for us. Re-attribute the data on the backside to make it easier to consume by the business community. And then you have some very good information to hand over to your marketing or planning or anyone else that's interested in the events that are occurring in the order of those events for your customers, your processes, or your services. Hope you stuck around to the end of this one. It was a bit lengthy. I hope it was worth your while and your view. Make sure to subscribe so you see the new information about each of the videos as I create them. Drop me a comment or a like so I know that you've watched it and it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, I will try to get back to you, and I can utilize that either in a short video or to the next set of videos that I would be working on. Have a great day.